Okay, so I'm gonna hire a behaviorist for my dog because I am stuck.
So this pet parent has a dog who is engaging in a jumping, mouthing, nipping behavior that seems to be occurring in a high state of arousal without any clear trigger. And they are asking for thoughts, and I was tagged a couple of times in the comments, so these are mine. So first of all, I just wanted to say to the pet parent, I think you're doing a really, really great job. I'm so impressed with the progress that you've already made in increasing your dog's quality of life, their well-being, and decreasing their stress. It's so clear that you love your dog very, very much. And there were just so many little green flags in everything that you said that I loved. I loved how you talked about how when you were helping your dog get more comfortable with strangers, that you didn't lure your dog closer. I loved how you said at the end that you want to stay away from punishment and suppressive methods, which I think is just so spot on. Just so many green flags, so many wonderful little nuggets in there. So I think you're doing a really great job with a very difficult situation. You also mentioned in the video that you haven't been able to find like other conversations around this or other instances of this online. So I wanted to reassure you that I have seen this behavior before. And I'm just now realizing that I'm a minute and a half into this video and haven't introduced myself. So I'm Gabrielle Johnson. I own Best Life Dog Services, and I specialize in aggressive behavior and nervous system dysregulation. I'm a certified dog behavior consultant, and I have my bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology. I, of course, can't share direct insight into what's happening with your dog because I would need to do a full functional assessment of their behaviors and essentially just gather a lot more information. But I have seen this behavior or variations of this behavior pop up many times before, and I'm happy to share my thoughts on those cases. Based on the level of fear that you were describing in your dog earlier in the video, I would be very curious to know if we are looking at fear that was fully resolved, or if we are looking at a dog who has anxiety and anxiety disorder, and if things have improved drastically, but perhaps there are still remnants of that. My suspicion would be yes. I am happy to be wrong about that. I have like 10 minutes of information from you on your dog. But certainly in the cases that I've seen this in before, because I specialize in nervous system dysregulation, I have a very biased sample size. What I often see is that there are dogs who struggle in a big way, and then they might make a ton of progress. And then sometimes it can be harder to identify how anxiety is still present because it isn't happening at like a level 10. And I would just be curious. It's entirely possible that this dog was fearful, not anxious, and is not dealing with any level of dysregulation. But I would be very curious. The trick to addressing a behavior like this is figuring out the function of the behavior. It sounds like when the dog is engaging in these behaviors, he is in a very high state of arousal. There are a couple of indicators for me for that. The fact that it sounds like the dog is no longer processing information, he can't respond to known cues. I'm forgetting now, but I think there was also an indicator that the dog maybe cannot take food. I could be making that up. It may have been something about toys. But besides the behavior itself and the body language in the clip that was shared and the description of the way that this escalates, it sounds like the dog is engaging in this behavior very high on the stress scale. So what we want to do is figure out first management. How can we prevent this behavior from being rehearsed? You mentioned, trying to turn your back and then reinforce good behavior, but that's not what I would recommend in this situation. Much like you noted that the yipping sound actually escalates the situation, so can ignoring. Your pup is trying to communicate something. We don't know what, but by ignoring that, you can see how a dog who's already in a really high state of arousal and is struggling to be understood, which is probably adding to that arousal because they're not getting their message across, and or they're not finding the relief that they're trying to find by engaging in those behaviors, if say it's like a coping skill for big feelings about something else. So ignoring will likely increase that frustration. Likewise, kind of taking an operant approach and trying to reinforce alternative behaviors is also likely not to be successful because it doesn't meet the function of the behavior. And it's clear that there is, whatever the function is, it serves a very big purpose. These are big feelings, big levels of stress hormones. Additionally, by the time the behavior is already happening, we really just want to be doing damage control, keeping everyone safe, getting stress levels lower as quickly as possible, and preventing as much as possible the rehearsal of that behavior. It is not a time for learning. This is very similar to like when a toddler's having a meltdown. That's not when you like try to teach them something new or like logic the situation to them. It's more about the emotions and in this case, the stress. Another way that this sort of a similar type of thing can show up and that might be more familiar to some folks is barking. Some folks will report a very similar pattern of their dog coming up and just barking incessantly, and all of the dog's needs have been met. They've been let out, they've been exercised, they've done mental enrichment, that sort of thing. I will say that one thing that you mention is that sometimes your husband will take the dog to play after these behaviors, and you're worried about that reinforcing the behavior. I would not be as worried about that reinforcing the behavior because unless the only real way that that would reinforce a behavior like that is if the dog is engaging in the behavior to request play. And if that's true, then we would just want to find another way for the dog to ask. But given how high the levels of arousal are, my guess is that it goes a bit deeper than that. And so my concern would be that we have a dog who's already very high on the stress scale. I wouldn't want to further increase arousal. I wouldn't want to sustain that level of stress and those stress hormones, which exercise can do. I would instead pivot to calming, sniffing, licking, chewing. I had one case where this was happening, and the behavior only happened with the mom. And it was, just like you describe, she was very upset. She was very hurt, like it hurt her feelings. She also had, similar insight to you in saying like, I know it shouldn't, I know it's not personal, like, but it's hard not to take that personally. I think that's totally fair. And we were able to, it was a lot of figuring out different patterns of behavior. It was a lot of delving into other areas of the dog's life. We uncovered a lot of areas where the dog was stressed and was anxious that the pet parent, who was a very savvy dog person, was not picking up on. And so then we went, oh, wow, like this dog, the things where this behavior, almost exactly like what you're describing. And then he would just refuse sometimes to walk on walks. And those were like, on the surface of things, the only presenting issues. But when we got lower, we dove deeper. There was also a lot of low level anxiety that wasn't reaching a behavioral threshold. It wasn't he wasn't reacting to people on leash. He wasn't biting anyone. He wasn't displaying big, fearful body language. But there was underlying stress, and then it was coming up in these moments that seemed unconnected, but he was kind of reaching a boiling point. And we were able to support that dog and really turn things around for him by noticing that, supporting him in those areas, by increasing his agency and increasing his behavioral flexibility, increasing his ability to communicate. And he became quite a cuddly kiddo. Another case that comes to mind, we were seeing something similar. It only happened with the dad, and it only happened in the evening. And that one was a much less complex case, but it was very interesting. It turned out the dog wasn't allowed on the furniture, and they did sports with this dog. They did so much stuff with this dog. But it turned out he wanted to cuddle with the dad, and the dad was sitting on the sofa. And it took a really long time, actually, to figure it out. Dad started sitting on the floor with the pup for about 15 minutes in the evening. Now his arousal levels were much lower when he was engaging in this behavior. But it was really interesting to see. And those are sort of the two patterns that I see this show up in, is either it's a boil over from other stressors that aren't being noticed, or it's an intensely communicated need that they don't have another way to communicate, and we need to figure out what it is. I think reaching out to a behavior consultant is definitely the right thing to do. And I am very, very hopeful. You guys seem like a great family, and I'm wishing all the best for you.